Hello, how are you? My name is Guillermo Rein. I am Professor of Fire Science here at Imperial College in London. And I want to tell you in a few minutes about what smoldering peat fires are. In this presentation, I am going to be covering the fundamentals. I am going to tell you what smoldering is, the driver of peat fires, why it is important, and how we study in the lab and in our computers the way it spreads and the consequences. Many of you are familiar with wildfires. And wildfires have two different types of burning when they are happening. The two of them are presented in this slide here today. One of them is the one that calls for most of our attention, where it has the flames and a plume of smoke that is dark, and the plume is hot, so it's actually rising up into the atmosphere and goes far away into the sky. And what is burning is, this flame is burning the vegetation on the surface of the ground. Typically the shrubs, the trees, and the grass. But there is another type of burning that receives much less attention. This is smoldering combustion. And what is burning is not burning the vegetation on the ground, it's burning the ground itself when the ground is flammable. For example, in peatlands when they are dry, although there are other types of fuels that are flammable because they contain high levels of carbon. When these soils burn, like peat, they produce plumes which are not dark, they're actually light in color because they contain a lot of particle matter that refracts the light in a different way. And the smoke is not hot enough, so it doesn't go up high into the sky. It actually stays close to the ground, unfortunately, where people are. And we're going to be talking about this type of phenomena. We study smoldering in the lab. I'm showing you here a video of a smoldering spread in the lab. A camera is observing the smoldering from the top. What is burning is the soil itself. You will see that there is no flame, and you are seeing on the left you see the visual image, and on the right you see the infrared. I'll replay for you again. Pay attention into the difference between the visual and the infrared. The infrared is showing you the temperatures and the regions that are hot. This video has been accelerated about 100 times for you because this video, to burn 20 centimeters, it just takes about 3 to 5 hours. So the video is accelerated so you can see it quickly, and you can see how the fire is spreading, the smoldering is spreading away from the ignition source and involves the whole of the sample. When we compare smoldering and flaming combustion, what we see is that the temperature of the smoldering is much lower. It's in the order of 600 Celsius. The spread rate is much lower. It's about 10 times to 100 times lower. And we also see that what is burning is the soil itself, and it consumes the carbon in the soil and leaves behind the ash. In this slide, I want to show you an image of a very unfortunate and well-known case of peat fires. It happened in 1997 in the island of Borneo and other islands around Borneo, mostly in Indonesia, but also in Malaysia, where the fires of this dry season were so intense and they were burning for so long, about 2 months, that they produced an immense cloud of particles that were actually affecting the health of the population. And also, you can see in this composite image, you can see that the emissions, the pollution, arrived to China and even to Australia, and there was international complaints about this. This case study of what happened in 1997 was a study in a very famous paper in the year 2002. So it took 5 years to complete the research. And this is the first time that a peat fire was studied scientifically with intent. Another famous case of peat fires didn't happen in Indonesia, but happened in North Carolina in the United States in the year 2008. It's called the Evans Road Fire. It's one single fire that lasted for many weeks. And you can see there a satellite, you can see over here a satellite image of the plume of the fire. That plume of the fire was not larger than the plumes of the fire that we can see sometimes in California or in Greece or in Spain. But that plume over there was not for 2 weeks or a few days. It was actually for many, many weeks. So you can calculate that the amount of fuel that was consumed in this fire in North Carolina was immense, was in the order to 10 to 100 times larger than the amount of fuel that was consumed in typical flaming fires. You can see the image over here of what happens to a tree when the soil is consumed, when the peat that is dry and is flammable has been consumed in the fire. It actually disappears and it leaves the tree hanging. You can see that about almost like a meter of the soil has gone. And I want to show you this video now. This video of the fire is taken from a helicopter, and it shows you some of the firefighting efforts that were taking place. You can see that image on the horizon. You can see how far away is the smoke coming. That smoke is smoldering. Don't look for the flames. There are no flames that were there. There's just smoldering for many, many weeks going on. And you can see what the firefighters did. They started to take water from the seaside and from the rivers and actually started to reflood the peatlands in order to suppress this fire. This Evans Road fire is one of the few known cases where a peat fire was successfully extinguished instead of having to wait for the rainy season or for complete burnout. It was actually actively suppressed with a massive effort from the government of North Carolina. It's not just Indonesia or the island of Borneo or United States. There are many cases around the world. It happens typically within every 2 or 3 years that massive peatland fires start to happen. They go out of control and they create regional and international emergencies. I'm showing you here some snapshots from the media that were so important that were covered by different newspapers. For example, many of them happen in Siberia, in St. Petersburg, in Moscow, in Malaysia as well, and obviously in Indonesia, unfortunately, where there is a lot of peatlands that get dry, and in other parts of the world. So this is a global problem. When we take into account all the carbon emissions that might be emitted from peat fires and we sum them up together, we are talking an equivalent to about 15% of the known anthropogenic emissions that are taking place every year. 15% is a sizable percentage, and this 15% is not taken into account in calculations of carbon emissions. So this is an additional 15%, and 15%, for example, is equivalent to the whole of emissions of the European Union or the whole of emissions of the worldwide fleet of cars. So 15% is a lot of carbon that is being released. In the lab, when we study this phenomena, as in this video that I showed you before, what we look is into how it spreads. Smoldering has the ability to spread laterally, horizontally. So there is a step of heat transfer that goes from one pit of the pit that is burning and transfer the heat to the next pit, and it pyrolyzes it, and it actually continues the process. And at the end of a few hours, what happens is it creates a massive void, and it leaves a layer of ash. And this void is the soil, the carbon that is now up into the atmosphere, and the minerals, the little content that could actually not burn, is deposited on the peat as it continues burning in different layers. Smoldering can also propagate in depth. This is something specific of smoldering fires, peat fires, that doesn't happen in wildfires. It can go in depth and burn all the depth of the soil that is dry until it reaches the water table that is so wet that it will stop the smoldering, or until it reaches the layer of mineral soil that then it cannot burn through that. And we can see that this depth is one of the drivers for the massive amount of fuel that is consumed in the smoldering, which leads to the large emissions of smoldering and also to the large carbon concentrations that are released into the atmosphere. So the two main problems that are produced by smoldering, their health effects and their carbon emissions, are actually driven by the ability of the fire to propagate in depth as well as propagating laterally. We did an account of the literature of where the typical depth that smoldering fires are able to burn, not in the lab, but in the field. We went to the literature, we collected all the papers, and we saw that the typical depth of smoldering varies between boreal and tropicals. We can see that tropical peat fires actually unfortunately are able to burn deeper because when they burn, they find more depth that is flammable. We're talking about almost half a meter, whereas the typical depth of burn of boreal fires that happen in the boreal belt of peatlands, they still burn significantly deep, but not as deep as the tropical ones. We're talking about 15 centimeters of depth. It's still significant though. And what I want to highlight with this slide over here is the effect that the emissions have on the livelihood of the people who find themselves involved in the haze that has been released by smoldering. Because this smoke doesn't go up into the atmosphere, but it stays attached to the ground. This is where people and animals and life is. So unfortunately it becomes the air that people breathe in and out, and it goes all around the city, the urban site, or the rural communities. So this is an image of the beautiful Marina Bay in Singapore on a normal day, and under haze conditions you can see how drastically the visibility is reduced and how drastically the health effects on the people who are breathing this air is. And that graph over there is showing you the particle matter concentration over the time of period, over a period of time. You can see in blue the typical concentration of PM 2.5 particles in the air of Singapore on a normal day, mostly because of cars, the traffic that is in Singapore, or the emissions from the shipping or the power plants. And you can see in red, about 10 times higher, the emissions of particle 2.5 microns that are produced by smoldering by haze. You can see that the comparison is dramatic and is really a call for the horrible effects that it has on the health of the people of Singapore, of Indonesia, and Southeast Asia, or around the world who are under haze conditions because the quality of the air they're breathing is dramatically low. I want to show you already some of the work that we do in the lab, some of the work that we do in the computers numerically simulating these fires, which I haven't shown you before today. But I want to finish with something very exciting. When we went into the field in Indonesia with our Indonesian colleagues and scientists, and we actually conducted experiments in an actual peatland, where we tested some of the hypotheses that we have discovered in the lab and in our computers. And also we developed new findings that we didn't know. So that's the team. We went into Indonesia and we conducted several experiments like this. This is one of the plots that we had. And we started the fire ourselves where it was flaming. And we saw how it was spreading, but then we also saw how it started to burn the peat that is under the ground fuels, and how it started to burn for about 3 weeks continuously until it was suppressed on purpose by us. And we published the results. So with this, I want to finish and to just summarize that smoldering is a threat. It's a threat to people, and it's a threat to the ecosystems. That is the most persistent type of combustion and is related to peat fires, but other phenomena that will happen, and that these are the largest fires on Earth in terms of the carbon footprint and the emissions that they produce, equivalent to the worldwide fleet of vehicles. And it is an emerging topic of science that is linking the health of communities, the health of an ecosystem, climate change, and is of global interest. With this, I finish. Thank you very much.